I'm Shuraym and welcome to another episode of Did You Know? Joining me today we have Ustaz Muhammad Abdullah and we'll be discussing on mental illnesses, the likes of depression. But stay tuned and we will be right back.
Depression is a real thing, and there's a difference between depression and so many other things, but it's a mental illness that is quite persistent and it can affect people in different ways. Some don't get to sleep, some actually oversleep. It makes people lose the will to do things in life. It's actually a condition that people have and can be cured.
Assalamu alaikum.
Walaikum salam.
Habibi, how you doing?
Alhamdulillah.
I'm very excited to have you on the show. MashaAllah. A lot of people don't really know that you're a musician. Do we call you a musician or we call you a nasheed artist? Which of it?
I'm not a musician. I have an album of nasheed, which was a long time ago, and I've been trying to do it again, but it's not happening.
MashaAllah. So, what we want to discuss today is on depression. And earlier we had lunch together and we're trying to discuss on why people get depressed and perhaps, misinformation about what depression is and what is not depression. Now, a lot of people, as long as they are a bit down, they feel stressed out, they don't say, I am depressed. What do you think we really need to know about depression?
Depression is a real thing, and there's a difference between depression and so many other things, but it's a mental illness that is quite persistent and it can affect people in different ways. Some don't get to sleep, some actually oversleep, perhaps by taking sleeping drugs. It makes people lose the will to do things in life, makes them feel like they're alone, and hence they become isolated from other people to kind of reinforce that feeling of loneliness. So depression is a difficult thing that has I think it's curable, very curable, and that's what people need to hear, that it's actually a condition that people have and can be cured. So depression is as it's just like headache. It's a
clinical
sickness.
as well.
It's a clinical thing. It can be diagnosed, and once that is done, the psychologist or the therapist can refer the patient to the cure that can assist that patient based on his physicality, sometimes even types of depression. And these things vary from people to people, from one patient to the other.
In Nigeria, a lot of people don't believe in depression, don't believe it exists. And more or less, I feel it's a taboo to even talk about mental illness. You find people that, as long as if you're depressed in a way and then you have the problem, you're not sleeping, they either tell you that you have genes or things like that. What can you say on this?
It's definitely true that there's this kind of taboo, stigma attached to being depressed. And some people, Muslims, I know about that, and even Christians, they feel that it's like having little faith. People that are depressed don't have strong faith.
You just caught me, having little faith. I love that point, because a lot of people feel that if you're depressed, that means you don't have iman, you don't have faith in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Is that true?
No, not true, not entirely so. But the truth is, there can be that. If you're a spiritual person, as Muslims, we believe that yes, that can be a cause. But generally speaking, I think even therapists and psychologists don't go, from the beginning. They want to know the person, their life circumstances, maybe traumas they have been through. And there are definitely certain traumas that can actually make people depressed. There's no two ways about that. So people can go through depression because of something that happened to them, and it's justifiable. It's really justified for them to be depressed, but getting out of it is what people should be focused on. So first of all, as you said, people should be aware that it's actually just a health issue. It can be an epidemic if not taken care of. A lot of people are depressed without any help, and this is affecting our society. It can affect productivity in societies. It can affect relationships in societies. It can cause a lot of social problems. And sometimes can actually even lead to violence and self-inflicted violence like suicide. There are people that cut themselves. There are people that feel they have to hurt themselves to feel better, to be I would say to feel that like they're alive. So depression is real, and the cures, as I said, vary. And several things can cause depression. I mean, people can be, as I said, justifiably depressed, and they should be helped, not, I think, judged.
Yeah, you talked about being suicidal and self-inflictness and likes of it. How do you know if you yourself, you're suicidal or your friend is? How do you see the symptoms? What are the symptoms?
There are several symptoms of depression. As we said, there's insomnia, there is a consistent feeling of angst and anguish. There is lack of belief in the self, there's loss of faith, there's many things can happen. There's violence. People can actually be violent when they're depressed. So it affects people differently. But I think when a good therapist sits with a patient and talks to them, they get to understand their overview of things and can help them. And that's what I think is called CBT, so cognitive behavioral therapy. Yeah. So you kind of help people assess their feelings and their behaviors and actually make sense of them. And that's a way to kind of help people get through depression, right, rather quickly and I think more efficiently, rather than perhaps just giving them drugs. But drugs can help, by the way. If people can't sleep for days, they should be put to sleep with help. And drugs can do that rather effectively, but the problem is addiction. Yeah. It can lead to a drug addiction, just like people that have sickle cell anemia often take drugs because of the pain. So it's the same. And I think a lot of research has shown that people that suffer from psychological pain, yeah, the MRI of their brains were studied by several psychologists in New York. It showed that the same part of the brain that was ignited when people felt physical pain was the same part of the brain that was ignited when they felt emotional pain. Really? It was the same thing, and sometimes it can be even more excruciating than physical pain. And that's when people think of taking their own lives, because they can't stand it. And it's very easy for people that aren't in that kind of position to judge them. Yeah. But I think, talking to people that are depressed and having, and this is not justification for suicide, by the way, but it's just having an understanding of how it can be difficult, right, for them is very important to actually begin to solve the problem of depression.
Muhammad, still on what they call on being suicidal. Yeah. Like in 2018, we had a lot of cases, or 2019, in Nigeria, we had a lot of cases where you find students killing themselves in university. I know someone passionately that he killed himself because he wasn't in the university, he wasn't doing well. Do you think that this is associated with the way the teachers or perhaps the lecturers have an interpersonal skill of dealing with their student?
Well, that can be a cause of depression, and as I said, many things can cause depression. You see people killed themselves in this country, I think, as you said rightly, last year, young people. So grades, people not making the right grades, people feeling hopeless because they don't have the money to do certain things that are necessary in their lives. A lot of other traumas like losing people in life and things like that can cause people to have depression over a long period of time. So these things are causes. I mean, if you feel strongly about your grades and you don't make them, I mean, you can be depressed. This has been proven. I think we need to have like an analytical study of this in Nigeria, but I've looked at several numbers from America that apparently 20% of students on campus in North America felt depressed. About 60% of them report being, or rather 40% report being anxious for a long period of time, stressed out, and about 60% of them felt lonely. So these factors actually can rack up the numbers of depression. So we don't have analytical studies, which I think we should, to actually look at it so that we don't talk about these things casually, like, oh, somebody just killed themselves and stuff like that, and make it a social media tantrum by people that actually care when the thing happens and forget about it after it's over. But I think we need to have a very wide dynamic look at these things. I mean, how can we help students? Do they actually have access to mental health care? Do they have access to therapists that could talk to them when they feel a certain way? Do they, are they aware of the signs that they can show when they're depressed and how they can reach out to ask for help? Because it's actually I believe that is actually a lack of social skill in young people, because we can't ask for help. We're not raised to, not you or me, but generally speaking, young people, we're not raised to actually ask for help when we need it. We think it's a kind of weakness to ask for help, and I think we have to make it okay for students to be able to say, I think I'm depressed, or I think I'm not happy. And the opposite of depression is maybe happiness. So we need to understand, we need to, I think, change the paradigm so that people see happiness for what it is. I think we're lying to ourselves. The wrong things are affecting our perspective of what happiness is. We think it's good grades or money or a good job. But research has shown that these things don't last, or rather it doesn't bring any form of like solid happiness. It can come and go, but a good social life, good friends, good family relationships or spousal relationships, these are the things that actually help people get through tough moments, so that even if there's a huge trauma that occurred, people can go through it easily. My point here is always think of when obstacles happen, rather than feeling I have failed, what is the strategy forward? So also think about the negative outcomes of certain goals that you have and plan for failure if it happens. When people talk about their problems, they go away. Even if they don't go away, they make sense of them and they become much better. So the emotions are connected with the physical being. People that are depressed and emotionally troubled don't tend to have a strong immune system, so they're susceptible to illnesses, different types, because their immune system drops.
Speaking about how, we meet our friends to talk about our problems and likes of it, let's come back to the suicide still. If a person commits suicide, how should the people react to such kind of things? Like after he commit the suicide, because when you find out that what most people do, most young people do, is that this person, this particular university commits suicide, and before you know, we all put it on social media. He did this.
They're
He
going to
killed
hell.
himself. He's going to hell. Blah blah blah, and the likes of it. And then at times that person, he's dead, but he becomes more popular, and other people think, okay, this is making people become popular. I might just as well kill myself. What's your take on this?
Okay, I think you're talking about how people highlight the issue of suicide in societies, right? It's a valid point that you made there. I think people should talk about suicide like they ought to talk about it. So there are particular ways I think we should learn to talk about these things. It's a terrible thing for somebody to take their life, and not long ago, people used to call it self-murder. So you've actually murdered yourself. Now people look at it from a different perspective. I mean, psychologists actually see that, they could actually be a valid cause for people to take their lives, which is a sad thing. I mean, there are people that feel they have nobody to talk to. They have no support system. It's easy to say, well, the nusus or the verses, or rather the hadith regarding killing the self, they're clear. But those people don't even know that hadith, right? They don't have access to these things. They don't have access to scholars that can teach them these things in a very organized manner that can help them get through these things. And Muslims are very, very, I think, progressive, or were very progressive on these matters. I mean, 705, if I remember clearly, the year 705, the Caliph Al-Walid built the first psychiatric hospital that had psychology wards with therapists, staffed in this hospital. In the Muslim lands, there was another one that was opened in 800 in Cairo, in 13th century in Damascus, right? This was, the West were still lingering in the dark ages when this started to happen in the Muslim world. I mean, Muslims have written books on psychotherapy. Al-Balkhi, Zayd al-Balkhi actually was a psychologist that talked about depression in such a way that when, I think 2-3 years ago, when they discovered his manuscripts on depression and the minds and anxiety and the definitions, they actually now have to rewrite the history of psychology because of these manuscripts, because they never knew that a Muslim has actually coded these things and talked about how external factors and exogenous, and also the internal factors can cause depression and different types of depressions.
Right.
So Muslims have been at the core of this. I think we've lost it due to our lack of progression. When the world was moving towards, okay, well, now we have advancements, we can look at brain scans, we can look how people react to certain things, like loss of a loved one, or Muslims were not doing that.
Right.
So we don't have the audacity to talk about these things as, say, the Western world now is talking about it, looking at how people, you could actually predict whether a person could actually kill themselves through this kind of studies that they're, churning out these days. So I think we need to look at it not just from that angle, whether they're going to hell or not. The fact is they've killed themselves. Suicide is a sin, of course, in Islam and in Christianity, right? They have killed themselves. But, how do you avoid this? How do you, you haven't learned, just talking about the implications of these things is like you saying, well, I don't care what caused them to kill themselves. Right? They just killed themselves. That's what they shouldn't have done. But, what caused them to kill themselves? What things could the society have done to prevent this? These are the kind of questions we should raise so that we stop people from actually feeling that they have to take their lives to solve their problems.
Yeah, you spoke about how one can notice the symptoms when if an individual is depressed. What advice do you have to parents or for parents who notice such kind of attribute or symptoms with their kids? What should they do?
Well, talk to your. Parents, one of the primary functions of parents is actually to talk to their kids. There's no two way about it. So you have to talk to your kids. You have to understand how they're feeling and appreciate how they're feeling. So there are several things. I would say the first thing is always look at the positive aspects of your kid's life. So I've spoken about this several times. When your kid has all the grades that are good and he misses some, don't focus on the ones he missed. At least focus on it after you've given credibility to the child for actually getting good grades. And that could actually help them. I mean, there's a study by a group of professors in Israel that actually showed that when you use the good grades of a child to talk about the bad one, there's generally a progression in actually getting better with the bad ones. Talk to your kids about their issues, concentrate about the positive, and teach them the path to happiness, which is not in material things. It's about having a good mindset, thinking of things that can go wrong. I mean, always there's something that I found quite interesting that I read recently. Michael Phelps, the swimmer, who said Bob Bowman, who was his coach, was always telling him to have a mental practice of running the race or swimming the pool before, actually doing it. And he said, we always thought of the positive, but I always had an if-then, right?
Yeah.
So what that means is if things go wrong, what should I do? And he practiced these scenarios. If water got into his goggles, if his swim track got torn, he could suffer from drag. And it actually happened at 2008 Beijing Olympics. He got water into his goggles and he couldn't remove them because he would be disqualified for breaking stroke. So he actually had the mental practice of, if that happens, this is what I should do. So he counted his strokes, he actually got the gold medal. So my point here is always think of when obstacles happen, rather than feeling I have failed, what is the strategy forward? So also think about the negative outcomes of certain goals that you have and plan for failure if it happens, so that you don't get overwhelmed by it and think that you're a failure. So parents can actually teach children to have this kind of mindsets by explaining these things to them and actually learning those things themselves so that they don't fall into that trap. So yeah, parents need to talk about that and teach, I think, essentially that your children are more important than any other thing, that can happen
Right.
to them that is not within your capacity. You have the capacity to make them happy or help them become happy.
True.
So that should be the focus, and not when, or maybe making an example of them when they get things wrong.
A lot of religious individuals or perhaps clerics and even the masajid today, you don't find us discussing on these topics even though they are actually relevantly timely. What advice do you have for, the khatibs, those that give sermon in the masjid? Should they find a way to address this, or should, lectures be organized for people to be called and, be taught about what depression and what mental health is?
Well, I think it's very important for any stakeholder in society to relearn things that are, okay, you can study psychology from the Quran. There are nusus there that talk about the psychological states of human beings,
Really?
the different levels of nafs, you can have nafs al-ammara, lawama, mutma'inna. And these things, we can take days talking about these. They're very important. But nonetheless, we should also follow the research, because the Quran says, فَاسْأَلُوا أَهْلَ الذِّكْرِ إِن كُنْتُمْ لَا تَعْلَمُونَ. Ask people that know if you don't know. There are psychologists that study using empirical evidence, looking at brain matter, looking at the amount of neurotransmitters the brains are, the connections between neurotransmitters as things happen, whether good or bad. So they have empirical evidence discussing these things, how to cure certain things, how to spot certain disorders. So I think people that are stakeholders should actually know about these things so that they're relevant to the society. You can't just come on the member and talk about things that, maybe 70% of what is happening on that field at that moment, you have no idea. You're just going to be limited in scope. So you have to broaden the scope of people. And I think government is essential here. I mean, there has to be a partnership between government and the citizens to actually kind of begin to alleviate this problem of depression and mental health and mental illnesses in general. So I think, yes, our stakeholders need to actually learn, key factors surrounding these matters and talk about them with an open mind, with less judgment. And then I think we can make progress that way.
Earlier you spoke about, when we have such kind of issue, we should tend to be open up to people, tell them about our problems, perhaps our friends, our family members. But doesn't that contradict the saying of the Prophet, whereby don't expose your sins? Because at times, what leads you to depression is perhaps a particular thing you've done, and you feel depressed. What's your take on that?
Well, I think if you have that understanding, if anybody out there has that understanding, then he should drop it. Don't talk about your sin as a different issue. Yes, of course, if you're aware of them and know that they're sins, then don't talk about them, fix them. But we're talking about people that don't know how to control their emotions, don't know how to make sense of their emotions. It's a great hadith by Hudhayfah ibn al-Yaman, who says, كان الناس يسألون رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم عن الخير وأسأله عن الشر مخافة أن يدركني. The people used to ask the Prophet about good things, the khair, and how to get to the khair, what to do to get good rewards and all that. And he said, I used to ask the Prophet regarding the evil things so that I don't fall into them. So of course, I mean, if you have that kind of feeling, then know that it's not a positive thing to feel that way. So talk to people that can help you. As long as you can't make sense of what's happening to you, the Christians have it in confessions, right? They go to the Catholic priest and they talk to him, and even helps them. Is a kind of CBT, right? There's actually a lot of research written about this. When people talk about their problems, they go away. Even if they don't go away, they make sense of them and they become much better. And to this, I'll tell you about this study that I saw. The Eichmann, Eichmann, who killed a lot of people. He was one of the generals of Hitler. He killed God knows how many people. But when he was brought to the trial in Israel, a lot of people started talking about their issues. The Jews that suffered at the Holocaust began to talk about what they went through, how their loved ones were actually killed, some of them in extremely horrendous ways. And what happened, there was a long control study by several scholars, actually, psychologists mainly. They found that they found out that those people that spoke about their troubles, their depressions, their anxieties about those moments, their panic attacks, they got better quicker, and they actually had half the hospital visits of those who didn't say anything. In other words, they went to the hospital less for their physical illnesses, and they actually lived longer, right? So, I mean, there's a lot of research showing that people that talk about their problems actually live longer and go to the doctors less. So the emotions are connected with the physical being. People that are depressed and emotionally troubled don't tend to have a strong immune system, so they're susceptible to illnesses, different types, because their immune system drops. So it's actually good to talk to people when you feel that you can't make sense of things. So that's the onus on society, to provide outlets for people that can go there and talk to people when, I mean, credible therapists and counselors and psychologists, when they feel a certain way that they don't understand.
All right, Mohammed, it's been beautiful having you on the show. I wish we could continue on this, but Jazakallah khair. Thank you so much for being on the show. There, viewers, we've come to the end of this episode. You've known everything you need to know. Not everything though, but a little about depression. You've learned that you should be able to talk about your problems, meet someone that you trust so much and talk about your problems. These are things that are not really taboo in the deen. We ask Allah that He makes it easy for all of us. Until the next episode, I leave you all in the care of Allah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.